Well, I'm really glad to be here, and it's an honor to speak to this group. It's a large group. I'm really blessed to be here. You know, on the plains of Moab, across the Jordan River from Jericho, Moses wrote the entire book of Deuteronomy, and he wrote that book to the next generation, the generation that would go in and take the land. And that's the generation that that I like to speak to. It's the next generation. You know, I know there's young people here, and a lot of you are younger than me. I went to prison. I was 36 years old. 3 days after I turned 36, and I got out, I was 65. And tomorrow is my first anniversary of being out. And so I really like to speak to the next generation. At the end of the book of Deuteronomy, God made some tremendous promises to that next generation that was going to go in and take the land. He told them that, if you would follow me, if you would serve me, that I will bless you, that my blessings will come upon you and overtake you. You know, think about that. Come upon you and overtake you. You won't be able to outrun them. God said, I will bless you. In fact, in chapter 28, verse 8, he says that I will command my blessings on you. You know, you just won't be able to get away from them. God will just pour out his blessings on you. But he said in that same chapter, he said, but if you don't follow me, if you turn away from me, that all the blessings will turn to curses. And they will come upon you and overtake you, same kind of thing. You just won't be able to get away from them. And, there's good reasons for incarcerating men in prison. And one of them, of course, is to protect society, right? But the other good reason is, to give men and women time to think and time to change. Well, they gave me plenty of time. In fact, one governor said that the only way that a life prisoner will ever parole in the state of California is in a pine box. And I'm sure glad that God has the last word and not man. But I remember shortly before I was arrested, my dad came to my house in Anaheim Hills, and he came by himself. He wasn't with my mother, and I knew that he came to talk to me. And my house was a tremendous confusion going on. There were 7 of us living there. None of them were my wife or children, and so Dad was there, and he says, well, I'm going to leave. And so as I walked him out the front door and down the sidewalk there toward his car, he turned around and he said, son, what are you going to do with the rest of your life? And, I just, I didn't have any answers for him. But, I'd like to ask some of you here today, what are you going to do with the rest of your life? In Deuteronomy chapter 30, God said that, he says, I set before you today life and death. And then he says, choose life. It's like you could feel the heartbeat of God. It's like he said, please choose life. Don't choose death. We have this word in the English language. It's called prudence. It's a great word. And it really, in layman's terms, it just means the practical common sense of taking the trouble to think about what you're doing and what is likely to come of it. And Paul, writing to the church at Galatia in what was still the heyday of the Roman Empire, he said, be not deceived. Whatsoever a man sows, that he will also reap. And, there's a saying that you will always, that you reap what you sow, more than you sow, later than you sow. And, it always takes time for things to catch up with you. The late Dr. Robert G. Lee, who pastored the Bellevue Baptist Church in Memphis, Tennessee, he pastored it for over 40 years. He wrote one of the most famous sermons in all of American history, and the name of that sermon was Payday Someday. God has built into the constitution of the universe that whatsoever you sow, you're going to reap. It's like in the DNA of the planet. You plant corn, and and corn always grows up. Why? Because it's in the DNA. And so it doesn't matter if you think about it, if you take the trouble to think about it or not, sooner or later, it's going to be payday someday. I grew up in a Christian home, and my mother was a Christian girl from her youth. And she gave our family a tremendous spiritual heritage. I wish she was alive today. She passed away in '99 while I was still in prison. But my dad gave our family tremendous stability. You know, it's been said that the greatest thing that a man can give to his children, that a father can give to his children, is to love their mother. My dad loved my mother, and he was faithful. And he's usually always here when I speak. I've spoke quite a few times since I've been out of prison, but he wasn't able to be here today. But he turns 88 real soon, and I'm sure glad that he's still here. And boy, we're blessed to be together. You can only imagine. But in 1966, I married my high school sweetheart. We were young, and we thought we had our whole lives ahead of us. How many of you know what was going on in the 60s? Yeah, I see some of you. Yeah, you know, it was the countercultural revolution was just getting started. The hippies, and there was a revolution in music. The Beatles, the Doors, and Woodstock, and there was the anti-war Vietnam and movement going on, and my wife and I, we were never hippies, but we loved the atmosphere of rebellion. We loved the 60 drugs, and we didn't think much about God at that time, and we were too busy partying and getting high and loving every minute of it. We didn't think that a drug like marijuana could possibly lead to other drugs with the power to take over your life. And so we just partied, and we had, and we had a good time. And one spring, we took a road trip up Highway 1. We wanted to go up to Big Sur and party with the hippies. And so we did that, and we went from Big Sur, we went on up to Haight and Ashbury, and we partied there for a while. We went on up into the Redwoods, and we stayed high most of the time. And it was on this road trip that we started thinking, that especially I started thinking kind of more spiritual thoughts. I'm thinking like, let's go back and sell everything we have and go up to Oregon and get close to nature and, buy a farm and grow our own pot. And, so I was thinking along those lines. And so when we got back home and we were partying one weekend, the next weekend we were partying, and, we were all high on LSD, and a friend of mine and I, we ended up out in the garage, and we're tripping. And I'm thinking like this, and we're talking like this, let's sell everything, we'll start a commune up in Oregon, and get close to nature and all this kind of stuff. And we're tripping like this. And all of a sudden he says, what we're talking about has to do with God. And when he said that, it was like, something kind of exploded inside my heart, and I'm going, yeah, it does have to do with God. He says, well, you know what? I heard about a hippie church over in Costa Mesa. I said, really? Yeah, he says, I heard about a hippie church over in Costa Mesa. I said, can you find out where it is? He said, yeah. And I said, wow, we'll get high and we'll go worship God with the hippies. And that's what we did. That's what we did, and we drove down here, right over here on Sunflower. And I think the year was 1969. It could have been early 1970. And we walked into that place that night, and it wasn't anything like I expected. Yeah, the hippies were there, and there were people there. That little church over there on Sunflower, it was packed. There were people in the aisles, kids and everywhere. And, we were young. We were all kids. And that night, the music was so dynamic. It was so anointed. That the music from that began in that era, the Christian music, is so anointed that it's impacted the style of what we call contemporary Christian music right up to the present day. And that night, the music was so powerful. And that night, Pastor Chuck came out up on a little stage, like this, no podium, no notes. He sat on a stool and he opened his Bible, and man, it was like God was speaking. It was so powerful. And that night, my wife and I, we couldn't wait to receive the Lord into our lives. And we did. And you know, after that night, everything changed. Everything changed. The Lord almost immediately delivered us from drugs and alcohol and tobacco, and we were like high on Jesus, right? I mean, it was, you know, the world had the hippie movement, but this was the Jesus movement, and it was just exploding. And every night that church was packed, and it was overflowing, and it wasn't long before they erected a tent right out here on this property right here where we are. It was right out here. It was a huge circus tent, and it was full, and the Jesus movement was just in full swing. And I remember during this time that one of our old friends that we always partied with, he came by our house. We lived in Diamond Bar at the time. And he came by our house, and you know, we were talking, and he was saying, you know, what's happened to you? What's going on with you? What's going on? And I said, well, you know, we're not doing drugs anymore. We're high on Jesus. And I said, you know, we tried drugs and all of that, and now we're trying Jesus. And, you know, when I said that, I knew in my heart, the Holy Spirit in my heart spoke to me. And I knew that I had said something wrong, because it was like I was leaving the back door open. You know, we're trying Jesus, and if this Jesus thing doesn't work out, we can always go back to drugs. We can always go back to partying. And it wasn't long after that one weekend, there were 4 of us, my wife and I and two other Christians, and we were, you know, and we were at our house on Friday night, and we were kind of talking back and forth, and we said, you know what, here's what we'll do. We'll go party this weekend, and we'll get high, and then on Monday morning we'll get our lives back right with the Lord. You know, it was sad, but that's what we did. You know, it's like, you know, we'll get this thing out of our system, and then Monday morning we'll get back right with the Lord. But you know what? Monday morning came, and everything had changed. Monday morning came, and it wasn't the same anymore. You know, we were just like Samson. You know, in the book of Judges, it says of Samson, that Samson said, after he had given the secret to Delilah, he said that he arose from his sleep, and he said, I will arise, and I will shake myself free. And it says, but he did not know that the Spirit of the Lord had departed from him. And that's kind of how we were. It was like the Spirit of the Lord had departed. And we tried to get our lives back right with the Lord. But everything had changed. And, you know, just one thing after another. And we tried coming to church. But now we were caught back in the things of this world. You know, how many of you know what it means to backslide? Yeah, you know, it's a lot of us, right? And you know, once you give Satan a place in your life, it just begins. You know, one thing leads to another, and over the next 12 years, it was like my life went downhill. Our life changed, and 12 years of backsliding, it was like living in a theme park. After one ride was over, we were just running and jumping on the next ride. And so, you know, the next 12 years, time moved by real fast. You know, when you're running from the Lord and you're back in sin, you know, time started to move real fast. And during that 12 years, I became extremely successful in business. I got involved in country music entertainment business, and I met a man from Ecuador, and he was directly connected with importing drugs into this country, and so life was moving on. And one day I had bought in a house up in Anaheim Hills, and one day 5 of us got into a limousine right out in front of my house. 2 of us were armed, and 1 of us was a paid strong-arm person. And, you know, I didn't plan on things happening the way that they did that day, but we got into that limousine, and I didn't know it when we got in that limousine, but it would be 29 years before I would come back to that house. Something bad happened that day, and, you know, you can make your own decisions. Everyone can make their own decisions, but you cannot control the outcome. You know, anyone can choose to drink and drive, but no one can control the outcome. I spent time in prison with men doing life sentences for drunk driving fatalities. They had previous drunk drivings, and now they're doing a life sentence for a drunk driving fatality. You know, anyone can choose to carry a gun, but no one can control the outcome. You just cannot control the outcome. You don't know what's going to happen. And, you know, in the Old Testament, there's no sacrifice for deliberate, willful sin. You know, the day that we decided to turn our lives, turn away from the Lord and go out and get high and get loaded that weekend, we didn't know that it'd be 12 years down the line and something really bad would happen. You know, sin will take you further than you want to go. It'll keep you there longer than you wanted to stay, and it'll cost you a lot more than you ever wanted to pay. Some of you have probably heard that. In 2009, I went to the board. It was not my first time to the board. I'd been to the board several times. And I got found suitable for parole in 2009. And Governor Schwarzenegger took that parole date away from me. But, you know, I began to have a little hope that I might get out. And God started to do some miraculous things. That was in 2009, I got found suitable. But over the next few years, God would do some things that gave me some hope that, you know what, I might go home one day. And I'm going to back up just a little bit. When I was in the county jail before I went to prison, one day I was laying on my bunk, and I'm daydreaming. It's the middle of the day, and I'm daydreaming. I'm in big trouble. I know I'm in big trouble, but I'm daydreaming. You know, I'm daydreaming like, you know, Lord, I'm daydreaming like when I get out of this, I'm gonna do things differently. When I get out of this, I'm gonna do things differently. I'm not gonna use so much. I'm going to, I'm gonna save some of the money, and you know, I'm daydreaming like this when I get out of this. And all of a sudden, the Lord spoke to me. And I hadn't heard from the Lord in years. I hadn't heard from the Lord in 12 years. But the Lord spoke to me that day, laying in the county jail, Orange County Jail, right here on my bunk. And he only said 4 words to me. He said, "For you, it's over." And I said, oh my God. I heard him so clear, so distinct. It wasn't verbal, but I knew exactly what he meant. For me, it was over. And that day, for the first time in years, I began to think about my life. I began to think about my family. I began to think about my children. And that day, I'd only been arrested maybe 2 months. That day, I rededicated my life to the Lord there in Orange County Jail. And I hadn't even been to trial yet. I mean, I hadn't even, nothing had happened yet. But I knew I was in trouble, and I told the Lord, I said, Lord, I'm sorry I couldn't serve you out on the streets, but wherever you send me, I'm going to serve you. And that's what I did over the next 29 years. From Chino Reception Center to Folsom State Prison in 1985. For the next 29 years, I served God in prison. I served in every prison all over the state. I never PC'd up. I served God on the main line. I walked the main line in every prison I was in, but I served God, and I never turned back the 29 years. And so in 2009, when I got found suitable, because I had told the Lord, Lord, if I have to serve you the rest of my life in prison, that's where I'll serve you. It's not such a bad thing. Serving God in prison, I told the Lord, I says, I'll serve you in prison. It might be a little easier than serving you out here. There's a lot more temptations out here, right? I saw a lot of hands go up when I was talking to the backsliders. But in 2009, when I got found suitable, I thought, man, maybe the Lord is going to get me out. And he began to work some miracles, and that did ultimately. There was a judge in Orange County. somehow my appeals landed on his desk, in his office. His name was Craig E. Robeson. And this judge helped me. This judge said, you know what? This man needs to go home. And he began to make some decisions, and the Attorney General of the state of California, they were furious. But this judge, he said if it was in his power, he would release me that day. He sent me back to the board, and he basically ordered the board to find me suitable for parole again. And by now, Governor Brown was the governor, and after going back to board under a court order, the board found me suitable, and so ultimately a year ago, I got out. While I was in prison, Pastor Chuck Smith helped me a lot, and he helped a lot of us that were in prison. And in 1997, he made it possible for me to go to Bible college, and I went by way of correspondence. I went to Murrieta. At that time, the Bible college had moved from Twin Peaks down to Murrieta. I went to Bible college there and graduated with a bachelor's degree in biblical studies. And in 2002, after graduation, I petitioned Dave Shirley, the director of the Bible college, and Pastor Chuck and the board of directors here at Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa, to let us start Bible college in prison. And so ultimately we did that. For 6 years, we had Bible college classes in there, and there's a number of men that are here today. One of them took classes there with us. He's an usher here, and he does worship music. And George Martinez, I know you're here somewhere, and I saw you earlier. And there's another brother out at the Murrieta conference. His name's Chad Lockholm. He runs all of maintenance out there and teaches out there. He was part of the Bible college there at prison, and so. The Lord did a lot of good things. You know, C.S. Lewis said this. He said that God can make good use of all that happens, which is true, right? But the losses are real. I still had to do the 29 years in prison. All of my children were young when I went to prison, and all of my grandchildren were born while I've been in prison, and so I missed a lot of things. But you know what? One day the Lord said, you know what, I'm going to open the doors and I'm going to let you out. You know, God did that. You know, I think of Joseph. One day he's in prison, right? And the next day he's seated at the right hand of the throne of Pharaoh. Listen, Joseph didn't do that. God did that. God did that. But you know what I want to tell you is that Joseph was faithful. Joseph was faithful. And the last thing that God told me before I left prison, I knew I was going home, and you know, I was like a week away, and you're thinking, like, after 29 years, you're thinking, man, anything's going to happen. The door's going to close. You know, the governor's going to change his mind. You know, but I'm starting to really think, you know what, this is really true. I'm going home, and they had transferred me to Chino, and I paroled from Chino on March 23rd, 2013. But before I paroled that day, the last thing the Lord told me, he said, I want you to go out and be faithful. Amen. Just go out and be faithful, and I'll take care of everything else. Men, that's what I have. Men and women here today, that's all I have to say to you. Just be faithful, and God's going to take care of everything else. You never know what he's going to do. Amen. Praise the Lord. God bless you.